Hello, everyone. It is Jennie and Laurie of Astropath, and we are here today to talk about the month of April 2026. We're doing the horoscopes. We already did a preliminary video about the entire month. For this video, for the horoscopes, we are focusing in on one little piece. But before we get to that, I want to just encourage you, please, to leave a note, subscribe, share, do all those things to help our channel to build. We appreciate that an awfully lot, and we do our best to respond to any notes people leave us. So, all our personal information, if you want consultations, if you want to work with us, if you want to know what else we're doing out in the world, all the information is below. Anything else before we dive into this conversation?
No, I think we're ready to go for
Okay,
it.
I'm going to say one more thing. If
Yeah.
you're interested in natal astrology, please pick up a copy of my book and read it. I've been revisiting it lately. It's an awesome book. It's
It,
funny, after I first got it done, when it first was published, I kind of wasn't that crazy about it. I think probably because I had just been so engrossed in it for so long. And now, like a year later, looking at it, it's like, yeah, I feel good about it.
yeah, and it does fill a niche. I mean, it really, there's lots of beginner books out there. There's lots of geeky professional blah blah manuals and stuff, but there's not that much in the middle.
Yeah.
So I think your book is perfect for that niche. And if you really want the practical, how do you work with a chart? How do you have a conversation with a client?
Yeah.
That's the book. So
Yeah.
just saying,
Absolutely. So
yeah.
there you
So
have
yeah.
that. Okay.
In all honesty. So, and speaking of honesty, we are talking about Aries a lot today because we have so much going on in Aries. And Lori and I have decided that we're going to really zoom in on this kind of interesting moment when the sun conjuncts Chiron at the end of Aries. So, our last video, we made a bunch of a big to do about early Aries. We had Venus and the sun moving in and then conjuncting Saturn and Neptune. But now we're going to the other end of the sign of Aries, all the way basically right before the sun goes into Taurus, and also right before the Aries new moon, which in my view is this. Once we get to that Aries new moon, which is happening on April 17th, um, everything is moved into Aries at that point. There's a huge configuration of Aries, and I will pop that chart up in a little bit. But just so you know, like it is like, wow, tons of Aries at that point. And the Chiron thing really brings in a whole interesting piece to the conversation. So we've chosen to focus on that. So we're going to have a little discussion of Aries. We're going to talk about Chiron, and then we'll jump into individual impacts. So, what do we want to say about Aries, Lori? I know you have some experience with this sign. So, yeah.
Aries, the very first sign of the zodiac, the cardinal fire sign. When I picture Aries, I think of a screaming infant demanding what it wants. There's something, every sign has a positive manifestation and a more difficult manifestation, um, Aries included. On the more difficult side of Aries, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about because we're talking about Chiron. And we'll talk about Chiron more deeply in a minute. But on the more negative side, Aries is like all the fire signs, really, there's a lot of fear behind the fire signs, which is partly why they show up with so much bravado and, here I am. It's like that here I am kind of sense hides a lot of fear, I think, for all the fire signs. And in Aries, um, there's just the confronting fear can so easily turn into so much negativity around anger and all the way through from frustration and irritation up into anger and violence and war. So there's a lot of difficulty in that. In order to work with Aries energy, we really need to think about kind of the flip side of that, the the more positive side of Aries is the ability to find such deep layers of courage and fearlessness and determination. And, you know, you put something in front of an Aries and they're going to just go at it. You know, it's a really, I always have said, I've got this little thing in my head around Aries is if you're in a dark alley and you hear some scary footsteps coming up behind you, you want to have a core of some Aries in you or in the person beside you because there's no stepping back. You know, Aries will just take
Mhm.
on what is presented.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, I really as well like to think about the spectrum of signs. And let's just start with too that since Aries is the first sign, and you mentioned the screaming infant, Aries is very much concerned with survival. So we can think about Aries as I want to survive. And to do that, it just needs to plow forwards and just kind of push anything out of the way. And an easy way to think about this is think about the energy of a seed and what it takes to crack that seed open and have the shoots go up and the roots go down and to really break apart that seed casing in
The
order to survive.
ignition. Yeah.
Yes, and actually, ignition is my favorite keyword for Aries.
Yeah.
And you can think of it as like the rocket blasting into space, how much energy it takes to make that explosion happen. So, it really is the most potent, as far as unbridled power,
Mm.
the most potent sign in the zodiac because it's the thing that has to get everything going. And it takes a lot of energy to do that. So you can easily see how that can become a sign that's out of balance where it's just all systems go. I don't care about consequences. I don't care about people's feelings. I don't care about, the survival of the larger entity. It is just about me and mine and me driving forwards. And so you can see how it relates to so many things we're dealing with our culture right now, where there's a
Mm.
sense of isolation. There's a sense of I have to do everything by myself. There's a sense of anyone outside of you being the enemy, or having to push through, or something to fight against, or something to blow up or knock out. It is a very one-sided way of looking at things, and that's kind of the culture we're living in. This very forceful, destructive, just like a juggernaut, without really considering the consequences. And in society, we're reaching a point where the consequences are that we're actually going to take us into actual self-destruction if this type of energy is not checked. So I think just to kind of that's sort of the backdrop, and then to, sort of shrink it back down. It's like, so each of us is sort of required to look at where does this hot energy live? Where is our anger? Where is our outrage? And there's nothing wrong with having those feelings. The question is more one of, well, how self-aware are you going to become to understand how you're dealing with this destructive energy and how channeling it for good? A simple analogy is driving your car. If you're driving all pissed off and you're cutting people off, you can see that you're in the angry, frustrated, unconscious side of Aries versus if when you're sort of like, okay, I need to slow down and like everybody else needs to go on the road at the same pace and kind of find a way that we're not going to crash into each other. But it's a simple example. So if you catch yourself in that anger state, that aggression, that is what is actually helpful to be like, wait a minute, what's happening here? Do I need to slow down? Why am I angry? What's going on? So I think it's a little bit of all of us having to reckon with that type of hot energy. How do we want to channel it? How do we want to kind of corral it and use it in a very decisive and meaningful way that actually helps other people rather than just being selfish?
Yeah,
So
and it's such necessary energy. You think of it as, it's spring. It's the beginning of spring. It's the startup energy. Like you said, yeah,
yeah.
nothing starts up without that energy that ignites it. And it's a beautiful thing if it's worked with properly. Now, what we want to think about now is Chiron. Are we
Hmm.
ready to talk about Chiron?
Yeah.
Chiron has been moving through Aries, I think we said since 2018.
Hmm.
So, I think of Chiron as a transiting planet. It is, well, let's just talk about Chiron itself.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Chiron is thought of, the first thing you'll hear about Chiron is it's the wounded healer. And people tend to think, we're all guilty of this, I think, in this culture at least. It's like, well, I have a wound, I'm gonna heal it. Okay, that's great. We all want to do what we can to heal the places within ourselves that we are vulnerable or wounded. However, there are certain wounds that cannot be healed. They just simply cannot be healed. And if you want to argue with that, just think about having an accident where your arm gets torn off. Is that something that can be healed? No. Think about having a child die. There are wounds that are never healed. And Chiron represents an unhealable wound. It can't be healed. It can be worked with, and it requires working with. If you got your arm torn off, you better believe you're going to be working to develop a life without it.
Mhm.
So wherever the wound of Chiron, however it shows up in your chart or by transit, it is an area that needs to be worked with in order to transmute that energy in a way that it can be worked with for the benefit of all.
Mm.
Wherever the Chiron wound is, I'm going to link to an article that I wrote on Substack a couple of years ago about Chiron. I think it was when Chiron was conjuncting my moon that I wrote it, probably. But you know, um, the whole mythology of Chiron is that there was a wound, that he had a wound that could not be healed. Um, I guess I won't go down that path right now, but yeah, it is a wound that can't be healed. He actually gave up his immortality because of that wound. But what he did before that was to learn as much as he could in order to teach others who had a similar wound. That's kind of how I think about it. So wherever it's showing up in our lives, we've got to work with it to help all of us. We're all in this together. We all are sitting in our own little homes, in our own little lives, looking at how aggression and war is hurting all of humanity.
Mhm.
And not just humanity. I'm going to turn this part of the conversation over to Jennie because she's got a lot of good thoughts about it. It's just that Chiron is a bridge that includes a lot more than just humanity.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, Chiron is I like what I just want to refer back to a couple things you said there, like the part about just the unhealable wound. It's like what that kind of cued for me was this idea when you have something like, let's say you have an intense cut or you did lose an arm or something, you really pursue, what's going to
Mhm.
bring balance back in your life. So even though you can't fix, like you're not going to regrow an arm, but you might get a prosthetic attached or something like that. But the idea is that you will be motivated to work with that wound because it's agony, it's painful, it's affecting your life in different ways. So in your drive to, kind of leave no stone unturned into resolving your pain, you learn all of these things. And so that body of knowledge is then the knowledge that allows you to start teaching other people about the same thing. So in our analogy, who were the missing arm, you might get to use some groundbreaking technology with a prosthetic arm and then end up showing other people how to use that technology in a way that worked for you. I mean, this is just kind of just to give you the picture, basically. So I think that that's part of it. And Chiron's job in mythology was to take all of these heroes, Hercules and Achilles,
Mm.
these like battling heroes, and take them into the woods and show them which herbs to use to heal wounds and to heal other things, what things to eat in the woods, and really how to be connected with nature and be connected with the nature spirits and the animals and the plants and the trees and everything else in the woods and be connected with that. So it really brings in the kind of aspect of, we'll say, of the masculine hero archetype, of bringing that in and having it. This is the healing teaching side of it. So there's like the green man is this
Mm.
motif in ancient religions. If you go to any church in Europe, look for the green man. It's the idea of this masculine healing force that's part of the Gaia, the earth force. So that's what we're working to heal, is that mystical spiritual part on a deeper level. And in Aries, we're learning how to transmute that hot energy into something that's really fearless, and that starts recognizing the way that our vulnerabilities are actually assets, and that we're afraid of our vulnerabilities, but it's the very act of facing those vulnerabilities that helps you see what an asset it is and helps you understand other people and then therefore be teaching. So the other thing I just want to say about Chiron is Chiron's the centaur, and is in fact the centaur that is at the center of the Sagittarius constellation. And the centaur's half man, half horse. So there's a huge symbolism. And I can't help but note we're in the year of the fire horse as well. And there's all kinds of ancient resources about humans and horses, which we will not get into right now. But the idea of half man, half animal. And so healing our instinctual natures, like bringing the instinctual and the spiritual
Mm.
together to recognize our heritage as of the earth. That we're in this interconnected field, all of us.
Mm.
And so Chiron is about healing that as well. And so part of this process that we're going to get into the individual horoscopes is how to kind of bring in that more the nature aspect, the instinctive aspect, those other pieces that we tend to overlook in our human centric world.
Mhm.
But it's all one living entity that we're all part of, and that's what we're kind of reckoning with. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Do you have anything to add to that piece of?
I don't know. I'm just thinking about, yeah, just understanding the difference between in how we manage anger and
Yeah,
aggression. There's that tendency, I think, in our culture to think of someone who's courageous and strong as being the person with the gun. I
yeah,
mean, what do you pick up when you're afraid? You pick up a gun when you're afraid, not when you're courageous. It's when you're afraid. And understanding that difference, I think, is so important. Fearlessness, which is really what Aries is developing through courage. Aries is developing fearlessness.
mm,
When you're holding a gun or a weapon of any sort or dropping bombs, it's not because you're fearless, it's because you are totally engrossed in fear.
yes,
When you are fearless, you are standing tall
yeah,
on your own. And Aries is a solitary sign in a lot of ways. It needs to find that space where it can stand in fearlessness.
yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that you kind of shown the light of the conversation in that direction, because that's exactly, it brings us right back to this moment where we're seeing this enormous like bluster and war is everywhere. Everything's kind of in the space. And what's underneath all that is fear,
Fear.
is a deep seated fear. And it's the type of fear where the folks who are wielding it that way, they're just looking for someone to blame. And there's this whole piece of like, I think when Aries is in its darkest place, it is about blame. It's about, oh, I'm going to go and kill that MF
Oh,
because they,
yes, yes.
like that anger. And really, it's because
Mhm.
there's so much impetus to direct that energy outwards. And Chiron in Aries is saying, no, you need to turn that energy inwards and look at your own anger, look at your own motivations, look at your own fear. What are your fears? And that's the transmutation, is the looking into the fear and then saying, all right, this is real. How do we work with it? Just like what you're saying, Laurie, the unhealable wound. It's like, how do we work with this energy? And that's where the transmutation is. And so we're taking this symbol of Chiron and the sun in April, and we're going to look at where it lands in everybody's charts. But that's the transmutation that needs to happen, and to kind of get out of that blame and I'm going to destroy you because I'm
Right.
so angry,
Right.
instead of what are you so afraid of? Like, what do and I can think of so many examples, of course, in politics and like where there's this destruction being aimed at the most vulnerable members of the population. And what's that based on?
Yeah.
But fear.
Fear. Yeah.
Right?
It's fear. And I think that is, when we get into the individual impacts, we are really looking at where fear is being held and how you personally can work to transmute that and use your renew what find that fearlessness, that ability to stand alone, and then offer that out
Hmm.
to support others that are in the same boat.
Yes. Yeah, and it's kind of all of our, really, I think the thing with Chiron is all of our jobs, right? To transmute our piece
Right.
of where we're working with Aries, and really it's really such a powerful energy, and so it is to be, we're working on how do we harness that,
Yeah.
and how do we move away from, because the other things are like fear of impotence. I think that's a huge thing, like of it being ineffectual,
Right.
having an overblown ego is really just hiding a tender little child that doesn't know what to do, the screaming infant again, right?
Right.
So yeah,
Right. So I think you've got the dates. I don't. I know that Chiron
yeah.
went into Aries in early 2018. When
Yeah.
does it go into Taurus?
So it goes into Taurus pretty soon, June 19th, 2026.
Oh, okay.
It's gonna dither because they it always does, and it will end up for good in Taurus on April 14th in 2027.
Hmm.
Um, the, the
Interesting.
other the other thing that's interesting is we talked about this is we think the seventh time that the sun has conjuncted Chiron while it's being in an Aries. Next time there's a conjunction, it's going to be in Taurus. So
Okay.
this is the last layer, dare I say, the seventh layer of a longer process. So even though we're looking at a moment in time, there is a longer process that we're referring to. And I also would like to say that those of you born roughly between 1968 and 1977, there's a little bit of variation to that. You all have Chiron and Aries in your natal chart. So all of those folks are in the middle of or have just done or about to do their Chiron return, which kind of adds an extra piece to your work in transmuting Aries.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So what degree of Aries is this conjunction? It's like
26.
26. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's another thing. Look at your chart. If you've got your chart, if you've got something near 26 of Aries, or any of the cardinal signs, it's going to be
yeah,
particularly um,
yeah,
significant to you. If you've got Chiron there or any of your personal planets or points,
yes.
it's a
Yeah.
powerful
And
time.
I think, so the keynote, just to kind of summarize, is we're really talking about redefining courage and reframing what it is to be a hero. We've created this pretty violent figure out to be the hero, but that's not really the hero in the story of what's unfolding right now. And so this is the reclaiming of the hero archetype in my point of view. And I think it's exciting. It's got different layers to it. Um, but I think unless there's anything else you have to add, I want to just show people the chart really quick of how
Yeah.
much Aries we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think,
Okay,
yeah, you should be able to share it there.
let's pop that up. So this is the moment of the conjunction, and you can just see Aries.
Just
So
imagine there's going to be babies born with this chart.
that's so you have Mercury's just conjuncted Neptune too. So look at that. This is just a busy chart. Um, the other thing we haven't gotten into, and we won't go crazy about, but also the idea that when this conjunction happens at 26 degrees there of Aries, the moon is almost caught up to the sun.
Yeah.
So we're in the dark moon here. So it adds an extra layer of this moment in time is, a real reckoning of, that internal spark. It's really happening in the deep dark before the new moon. And the new moon's the very next day.
Hmm.
That new moon in Aries, it's at 27 Aries. Chiron's very much part of the new moon story. And really, that's when we have this massive dose of Aries we all have to deal with, right?
Yeah, so it's really I mean, it is like waking up this moment in time to start this process within yourself to really transmute that frustration and anger into courage and fearlessness. I'm going to just stick with that simple
Yeah.
little statement. You know,
Yes.
Aries is a very simple sign. That's another thing I want to say about it. It's so simple. It's just like it's that ignition. There's not a lot of layers of complexity to Aries. It's just blast forward.
Yes. And everybody has Aries somewhere. Even
Right.
if you don't have planets in Aries, it
Yep.
still exists in the blueprint, the wheel of your chart. So everybody has some kind of message, and everybody's got a Mars, which rules Aries. So no matter what, this is what we're working with. And as ever, do look at your chart because you want to know how close this conjunction is. That gives you extra information about your kind of part in it. Um, but anyway, I think this is a cool chart to see that much Aries in one place.
That's a lot of Aries.
Yeah. So get ready. So this is a great time to be thinking about how do you want to channel it? How do you want to wield it?
Yeah, and I think one of the things with doing these horoscopes is just really learning to understand that we all have every sign. You
Yes.
know,
Hmm.
people walk around, they think, oh, I'm a Taurus or I'm a Gemini or whatever it is, but we all have every sign in some area of our lives. And
Yes.
it's good to get that clear.
Yes. Yeah. And Aries is such an instinctive sign anyway. And then we're bringing in Chiron, which wants us to look at our instincts and marry our instincts to our spiritual side,
Mm.
and that's kind of what the part of the transmutation is. So I really like that. It like there's a, I don't know, I think Chiron's like the custodian of the nature connection. So,
Yeah,
that's
you
going
were
to be.
talking about Chiron as the bridge. How did you say that?
Oh, well, in several ways, because Chiron bridges that gap between the human part of ourselves and the
Right,
instinctual animal part. In
right.
astronomy, it goes between Jupiter and all the way out past Saturn. So it's got a really weird elliptical orbit. So it really kind of brings it inside of those social planets of Jupiter and Saturn, and then it goes outside and then it has this really elliptical orbit where it spends a lot of time in Aries and not very much time in Libra,
Yeah.
and then different variations with each sign, but the longest in Aries and Pisces. So,
Yeah, and it's such an interesting part of your chart natally. If you're
yeah,
interested in Chiron, make
yeah,
an appointment with one of us to really get into an understanding of what Chiron means in your own natal chart and how to work with it. It's quite fascinating.
yeah. As I know both of us have some pretty potent personal stories about how Chiron has been part of our
Yeah,
unfolding at different times. So that, it is a yeah, it is an interesting topic.
yeah, yeah.
Um, well, anyway, I think we could rattle on, but we should probably switch gears. Are you ready to do the individual impact?
Yes, we have 12 individual pieces to look at, so I think we probably should get on that.
All right, let's get on it.
Get on it.
All right, so we're going to start, of course, with Aries rising. We are talking about Aries at great length. Hopefully, you've listened to the first part of this video. But
Mhm.
now we're going to talk about how this Chiron Sun conjunction in Aries might affect you. So, first of all, with an Aries rising chart, I mean, we are talking about the most powerful house in the whole 12 houses here, the first house. So, this is a huge time for you with Aries rising to really develop your self awareness. And part of that self awareness is going to be asking yourself questions like, when do you feel angry? What really pisses you off? But also, when do you feel burned out? I think that's going to be another important question. So keep those two questions in mind. Anyway, so as we kind of cruise through April, the sun here is poised to enter Taurus on April 19th. So it conjuncts Chiron on the 16th, and then by April 19th, it goes into Taurus. So this is the last connection the sun makes, and before the new moon happens, and before it goes into Taurus. and it's going to connect with Chiron again at 26 degrees of Aries. So for those of you with Taurus rising, you're really kind of thinking about what is the cultural wound to do with Aries. All these topics we talked about in the beginning, this like tendency towards aggression, towards violence, towards wanting to blame, and all the things we see around us a lot. And the question is, well, what's your part in this? Like, how can you take this powerful ignitive energy and transmute it into this leader for good, and really transmute it into this positive, like, let's take this in a new direction in this very dynamic way. So it's kind of maybe a tall order.
Mm,
But because it's happening right at the dark moon, you're really going to have to go in and look. You're going to have to really dig into, what motivates me, what frustrates me, those types of questions to look at this. So I think that's kind of the keynote. And then, as things move into Taurus, as the sun moves into Taurus, you'll be able to ground all this into more
mm.
of an earthy container afterwards. So that's kind of the crucial piece. Yeah, Laurie, what do you want to add to this picture?
Oh, it's so interesting. People with Aries rising always intrigue me because they just have that sense of themselves. And you kind of can feel it when they walk in a room. It's like they're there and they have that sense of directness. You're not going to mistake their I don't know. They just show up with so much strength and so
Yeah.
much determination to show their most authenticness. But yeah, you really want to look at how, with this conjunction happening there in that first house, really looking at where you feel frustration, where other people see frustration in you.
Mm,
It might not even be as easy for you to recognize it because it's so much who you are. You might want to ask your friends or the people in your life, where and how do you see frustration show up from me when I'm in your presence? And really taking some consideration of that. Is there some place in me that feels like I have to show up in this certain way because I'm afraid somebody will see me wrong or whatever? Wherever this is happening, we have to look at where there is frustration or
mm,
where there's anger or fear. So
yeah.
this is really close to home. And how does that sense of who you are possibly show up with too much fire and aggravation that other people might see? And really, yeah, that whole idea of transmuting the aggravation into just a fearless stance of
Mhm.
courage and determination without the angst of the fear underneath it. So that's what you're examining. That's what
Yeah.
you're examining. And if I had Aries rising, I think that's what I would do is ask the people around me because it might be just too close for you to see it yourself.
Yeah, and I think there's some other clues as you're talking, Laura. I'm recalling some other things that could be helpful. One is going to be if you're moving too quickly. If you find yourself speeding when you're driving, moving too quickly through your day, rushing through stuff, I think that's a sign too. Like you may not feel annoyed or aggravated because you're not even slowing down enough to feel those things.
Huh,
You're just
interesting.
blasting through your day. And speed is also something that can cover. I think another thing that could be part of this might be that deep down, a sense of doubt. That would be sort of that darker face of Aries is that self-doubt or a sense of like, oh, am I enough? And I think it really is, that could be part of the fear part. Like, and so speed covers fear. So there could be some part. I would just think of Aries in the first house. There might be some questions deep down. Am I on the right path? Am I showing up the right way? Am I really a leader or do I have imposter syndrome? I could see some of those doubts being the deeper underneath thing that the Aries heat is covering. And and just knowing about those, bringing those to consciousness is what's going to allow you to kind of move forwards with more clarity and focus on what you do want instead of what you're afraid of.
And
You know?
and being really aware of how much impact you have on other people.
Yes,
You know,
yeah,
so as you shift that, as you shift what other people might see as anger or too much assertiveness or aggression, and you're replacing that with fearlessness and assertiveness rather than aggression, you are showing up as such a powerful example. I think that's an important thing to think about is the example that you're setting up for other people
yeah,
because they're seeing that Aries. And if they're seeing the angry side of Aries, they're taking in a very different example than if they're seeing this courageous, fearless leadership.
yeah, yeah. And lest we forget, growing up in a culture like this too, it depends on, part of the first house is your body and what your body looks like. If you're born in a female body or a male body, there's going to be totally different expectations for how you show up, and so that's also going to be part of the pressure. And I can see people more on the, in the born female end of things being like, people always think I'm angry because showing up as a strong leader is harder. Whereas if you're in, a masculine or a male appearing body, that you would get a different response and therefore might behave differently. So I think that has to be part of your thinking, and that has to be part of you understanding your identity and how you're showing up in the world too, right?
Yeah, and you know what's really funny? As you're talking, I'm thinking about how you've talked about this kind of bridging the human to the
Mm.
other, the animal, the
Yeah.
instinct. And what came to me is I know two women with Aries rising that both ride horses. I just love that.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Cool.
if you have Aries rising and you have any opportunity to make some sort of connection with the animal world, if you happen to have a
Mm.
horse, go out on it. You know,
Yes.
really, because you're embodying. Oh my God, when you're sitting on a horse, you are embodying that energy.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
Yes. That's definitely part of the, I don't know, what I'm envisioning here too. Yeah, that's awesome.
that's
Thanks.
awesome. Yeah. Huh.
Cool. All
Okay.
right. Taurus rising is next.
Okay, so for folks with Taurus rising, we're talking about the month of April. And before I say another word, I really, if you skipped that first part of the video, please go back and listen to it. It will give you a lot of information that will make it much easier to understand what we're looking at. We are looking at this one particular part of the month of April. The month starts with the sun in Aries, a lot of planets going on in Aries. And at the end, in the middle, we have this point where the sun conjuncts Chiron. The next day, we have the new moon in Aries. And 2 days after that, the sun moves into Taurus. So this is like the month has built up to it, and then it comes down after it as we adjust to what it is that's getting set in motion. Now, with Taurus rising, you've got Aries in the 12th house. And we've been talking a lot about Aries and that what this period of time is really showing us is how to look clearly at where we hold within our lives the struggle of Aries, the transmutation from the more difficult side of Aries to what we want to reach, the better side of Aries. Better, worse, that's a weird way to put it. At any rate, with Taurus rising, you show up in the world as this calm, steady person in general. That Aries, that fiery, direct, powerful energy of Aries, that screaming infant of Aries, is stashed away in your 12th house. There's some way that your unconscious has a lot of heat in it.
Mm.
And you want to really take this period of time to explore your own unconscious patterns of thought, your unconscious things that motivate you from behind the scenes. Where is there difficulty in there? Where is there, we're talking a lot about the the wound of Aries in our culture. And we can see it so clearly right now with all the war and anger and guns and all that, which is all the difficult side of Aries that really comes out of fear. So for you with Taurus rising, the suggestion here is there's some place that fear has been stashed away
Mm,
in the back of your unconscious that needs to be explored, that you have an opportunity to explore it and work to transmute the fear that turns into aggression and anger and transmute it to a simple state of fearless confrontation,
mm.
fearlessly standing on your own. It's a very individual sign. What do you have to add? I'm not sure if I captured what I'm trying to here.
Oh no, it's all heading in the right direction, Lori.
Good.
I do think, it is interesting, and you've mentioned this, but yeah, with a Taurus rising person, there's a subduedness here. I mean, Taurus is going to be subdued, but then the Aries energy is down. It's beneath, it's not obvious, it's not overt. And so accessing your own fire is part of the story here. Like kind of you can almost picture like a journey of like having to go into a cave and go down into this cave in order to find this fire burning. That's the image already just with 12th house Aries. And now you're putting Chiron in here, and now what we're saying is that there's a way in which your Aries energy might be a part of the collective Aries because it's 12th house. So like your anger and frustration might be at distance from you. It might be projected into things out in the world that you feel very angry about. And that's fair enough. It's fine to feel angry about those things. But it's almost like for you, you have to kind of go down into the subconscious and then to get to the collective energy of Aries, which is kind of what this whole Chiron and Aries business is about what is your role in how you can transmute the hot energy of Aries. So in your case, you really do have to kind of do this shamanic journey to kind of
Mm,
unearth that,
yeah.
and then do this like alchemical transmutation of the energy and let that serve as your kind of your drumbeat, your vital spark of fearlessness, to kind of help you figure out how you want to meet the collective bullshit that's going on right now, right? Like kind of to confront that. I mean, there's a to that. So I think this one is particularly interesting because it really has that feeling to it to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
confronting it with fearlessness, not with violence.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's an interesting relationship with fear in the 12th house too, I think, where it's
Mm.
sort of at distance from the individual. Like, "Oh, I'm not really going to deal with that because it's so far away. It's so down under there that I don't really have to deal with it." And you might surprise yourself with an eruption of anger or outrage. But wow, what an opportunity that will be for you to kind of make that connection. I
Yeah.
think a huge piece of this is nature too, right? I mean, just what's the connection to the outdoors and the instinctive nature?
And
Yeah.
and how do you, yeah, with that, it is interesting in that 12th house, thinking about the collective wound and I like what you said about you might feel this eruption
Mm.
that's not necessarily even your own.
Yeah.
It's like, there's wars going on a
Mm.
long distance away.
Yeah.
But with that collective fear slash violence, you might just be feeling what's going on in your gut somewhere that yeah, really, really working in a very quiet, silent spot inside you to stand up to it without frustration and anger, just standing.
Because, as you're
Courage.
yeah, like you know what word is coming up for me with this is conduit. That you are that
Oh, yeah.
Taurus rising people are a conduit from, the anger, the injustices or the frustration in the collective field of consciousness. And it's you get it channeled directly to you in a personal kind of level in a way. Like you have access to that understanding, which
Yes.
also means, yeah, the whole backdoor thing.
Yeah.
It also means to me that part of your what's going to help you as a Taurus rising person is you've got to get out into those landscapes, one way or another. I mean, even if you have struggles with, mobility, you can do that in your backyard. But I'm just thinking, I have an image of a person close to me with Taurus rising and just going out into these beautiful remote mountains. And just what comes to you from that experience of hiking up that mountain, which is kind of an Aries thing, but seeing this kind of collective scene through this landscape. And so I think there's something about that is coming through.
I'm just thinking of that person being on a horse.
Yes.
I want to bring all of a sudden, I just want to bring this horse image in with that Chiron. That's really interesting.
Well, this is
Okay.
a horse year, so
Yeah.
all right, so let's move on to Gemini rising.
Yes.
Okay, so
Do it.
let's see. So those of you with Gemini rising, we have been talking about, this spectrum of Aries energy, like its harder component all the way to its most enlightened use of the energy, we'll say. That comes through when the Sun conjuncts Chiron on April 16th, happening right before the new moon in Aries, and right before the Sun ends up going into Taurus. So it's happening at the very end of Aries, 26 degrees. And for those of you with Gemini rising, this moment, this sort of transmutational moment, is happening in your 11th house of community. So, we've talked at length, and I really encourage you to watch the beginning because we talked about Aries, we talked about Chiron, and it's really helpful to understand how these symbols play out. But essentially, what we're looking at is we're looking at the problematic side of Aries, the rage, the violence, the actions that come straight out of fear without thinking about it. Just the boom, I'm gonna be destructive because I'm terrified. And we're asking or we're talking about how each of us kind of has this role to play and how we transmute that really powerful Aries energy into a force for good. So moving away from violence and really recognizing the fear that drives that and asking ourselves what it means to step into a state of fearlessness. So that's kind of it's maybe sounds pretty lofty, but this is the culmination of a 7-year process. This is a time when a ton of planets have just moved into Aries. So this is a kind of a crucial moment to really reckon with this. And so it does mean looking at fear. It does mean looking at places where you misuse Aries energy, where you, let's say, are really pissed off and destructive, or where you actually have a giant ego and think you're the only person who can possibly be the leader, and have really gotten into an ego state. That could also be another manifestation of Aries in the 11th house of just thinking, because the 11th house is groups. So the question here is, how do you find out like what's your version of transmuting this cultural wound of aggression, and then how can you really turn that and channel that into a more positive force and really sort of focus it into the positive leadership qualities you do want, and really look at what role you have to play in reshaping community, to embrace this energy and to really stand up with courage. I mean, that's no problem, right?
Right, right. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that 11th house. And
Yeah.
with Aries there, there's a tendency, this is how I'm thinking about it, is with all of this happening in that 11th house, think about how you fit in or don't fit in
Mm.
to whatever communities are important to you. The 11th house I think of primarily as the community of like-minded others that support us. With Aries there, you've got the energy to be a leader in that area.
Hmm.
But you also, this is a community that has support you to what you're trying to create and build. There's, I think with that Chiron having been moving through that area for a long time now, you may have been in a process of just really struggling to find where you belong. There's that sense of belonging. And how do you, if you don't belong, what happens? What is the fear of not belonging create in you? Does it create
Hmm.
anger at the community, anger within the community? What is that process been for you over these past years? And how can you move into a state of just, I just love the word courage for Aries, the need to develop the courage to not have to rely on anger or violence to get what you want, the
Yeah.
courage to stand in fearlessness. Aries is a very singular sign, and it may not feel like it belongs, but you know what? It can still stand in fearlessness, belonging or not.
Yeah.
Chiron's in there. There may be a real wound to feeling like you belong. That might be part of what you're encountering right now. This is a really important time to work with how you manage that, how you navigate yourself in that, getting away from the anger and the frustration, setting that aside to just embrace your own sense of, I can move forward. I'm okay on my own. It's Aries after all.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting at, I like that whole sense of belonging idea because I think part of the 11th house is sort of recognizing that you do have support. And there might be this idea with Aries there that you don't have support. You have to do everything by yourself, and nobody's going to do it if you don't do it. And so I think part of the releasing of the wound now is actually recognizing, no, I am a member of a community. I think that's how you frame the Aries in the community. Is like I am a member of a functioning community, and that therefore you don't have to do everything alone. And I think that's part of the problem with Aries is when it is completely burdened with I'm completely isolated, it's a problem because you can't see the bigger picture then. So it's kind of this one's interesting because it kind of does insert that selfhood into this interconnected picture. And so your task is to how do you work with both of those? How do you bring your autonomy to the group? How do you realize that the group actually supports your autonomy, and
Right,
and how you can participate in community.
right. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that's what brought it for me. And lest we forget, there's a big piece here about how does the greater world fit here beyond humans? How do animals fit here? How does feeling we're all part of a round planet, that's got all these systems. So there's a bigger piece there too to think about. So it doesn't just have to be in your human community, but in the broader perspective of things as
Right.
well.
Right. Yep.
The horses.
Get a whole bunch of horses and put your
Yeah.
whole community on them, right? I'm getting obsessed with this
Yeah.
horse idea.
Yes. All right. Next.
Next.
Wait. Cancer rising.
Oh, I'm supposed to start talking about this one.
Right.
We take turns and I forget. Okay, so for those of you who have Cancer rising, first of all, please go back if you didn't listen to the first part where Jennie and I just talk about all this stuff. Please do. You'll learn a lot that will help you understand this. Now, what we are zeroing in on is this particular conjunction between Chiron and the Sun, which happens on April 16th. The following day, we have the new moon in Aries, and 2 days after that, the Sun moves into Taurus. So, this is a particular period of time right in the center of the month. The first part of the month is leading up to it, and the next part of the month, we are beginning the assimilation process of it. But this is a point where you want to look at, if you've got Cancer rising, you have Aries in the 10th house. The 10th house is the most public house. It's the area of life that speaks to your social reputation. Your career is probably greatly involved here. You've got Aries in this house. This is you got a lot of energy here, a lot of startup energy. You want to be the leader of your wherever your career, your social reputation, you have that leadership quality. Now, Chiron's been moving through this area for quite a number of years. And what we're thinking about here is that Chiron is carrying with it this wound of the culture that for you is showing up in the 10th house. It is, you think about the wound of Aries. If there is a wound in Aries, we're going to need to look at the most difficult issues that Aries brings to the table. Aries brings some difficult issues to the table. All signs bring difficult issues to the table. Aries brings the issues of anger, aggression, violence, war, all of those things that we wish didn't happen. On the other hand, Aries also brings the ability to face what's coming at us. Um, what we want to look at here is for you with Cancer rising, where do you bring to your career or social reputation? Where is there fear that underlies a tendency toward some of the more negative sides of Aries? Where is there fear here? And where can you, because it's fear in Aries that brings us into these spaces of aggression and violence and all of that. So you want to find where the fear is and then do whatever practices you can find, because Chiron is always looking for practices to help heal what can't really be healed, but can be worked with to make it a positive for all of us. So for you with Cancer rising, you're finding that fear in your career space and then transmuting the frustration and anger to the ability to take action, to stand up for yourself, to find the courage to not need to look for the aggression or the gun, to find the fearlessness to face what there is to take action on.
Mm-hmm.
That's your job as part of the collective process of shifting anger and war to fearless action.
And I think it's worthwhile to think about, in each of these,
Fascinating.
what's the fear about? And I think probably in the 10th house, we're looking at a fear of really a fear of impotence, that your offer, your contribution you want to make to society is going to fail.
Mhm.
On the other hand, you might be afraid of success. That could be another thing too. So the fear of failure is bringing in the fear of inadequacy. Like, oh, what if I'm not enough? What if I can't do this? What if I can't, and I, as a Cancer rising with a astrology business, I'm familiar with this fear, this kind of like, oh my God, what if I can't do this? So I think the courage comes in at facing that fear, and if it's that one, and using that impetus to not have to feel like you have to do everything by yourself, but realize that a business has clients, a business has people that support that business, a business has colleagues, and all these other pieces that you're not actually doing it alone. And that's actually going to help you figure out how to cut through that fear of failure. I think if you have fear of success, it might be more that you're afraid of who you might be given those tools. If you succeed, might you be someone who's a bit ruthless or a bit cutting, or is a dark empath with Cancer rising? So in
Mhm.
any case, I'm just painting some scenarios, but I think that the big thing is we're trying to show up in public here in the 10th house. What are the fears that are associated with showing up in public? And those are the two that come to my mind. And then as a Cancer rising person, what's your part in facing that fear, identifying what it is, noticing where you feel anger, noticing where you might feel those, you really get into those fear spaces. And then, as Laurie was saying, like, so then what? How can you utilize this fierce Aries energy to move things in a positive direction, to look at where you want to go, and focus on that instead of worrying about all the fears and, oh, what if I crash into that? Like, okay, it's time to release that and really just get into this more decisive part of Aries, I think. So, yeah, and we've been talking a lot about, there's a lot here about instinct. So I think
Mhm.
there is, even in our, very kind of materialistic world, your instincts matter. So your instincts for who you're here to serve, your instincts for whatever it is that you're doing in that public space, tapping those, trusting those, working with those, I think is going to be an important piece of it as well.
I just want to add one other little thing. As you
Yeah.
were talking, I suddenly heard in my mind Noel Till talking about Aries as the need to be number one. And so, we can look at where Aries is in our chart. Is part of our fear that we're just not going to be as great as Aries thinks we're supposed to be?
Hmm.
Because Aries definitely has that. I mean, I have an
Yeah.
Aries moon. I know the dark side of Aries pretty well, quite honestly. But yeah, it's that need to be important.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that is such a great little phrase to understand the need to be number one, and taken in different directions. It is a helpful statement.
Yeah.
And then the other thing just want to add here is bringing in maybe unusual, unconventional ways of handling this. The career is sort of the pinnacle of the material wealth. Well, what if you called in a more of a shamanic energy here? What if you brought in ritual? What if you looked at what herbs could support you in your process? What if you looked at your connection to, animals, to the greater world, and that you're not just here to do something for humans, but you're here to do something for the world? Broadening that out and asking yourself what that is. And that really changes the definition of wealth, which the 10th house might sort of indicate the accumulation of material wealth. So it's important to ask those questions, broadening out into that, not just the staying in the narrow
Interesting.
human world. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. I could go down another rabbit hole. I'll resist.
I know, I just want to say that. Okay. All right. Shall we carry on?
Yes, let's carry on.
So we're on Leo rising. Okay, so first of all, with you, Leo rising, with anybody, definitely encourage you to watch the first part because we really dig into Aries and Chiron, and that's what we're talking about today. We are talking about the Sun Chiron conjunction that happens on April 16th. It's happening right before the new moon, so we're in the dark moon. And we're looking at what Chiron and Aries symbolizes on a cultural level, and then sort of looking at what's your part to play in it. So before I get too far ahead here, first of all, this is happening at the end of Aries. The sun is just about to go into Taurus in 3 days after this. And so the sun, this is sort of a final kind of passing hit for the sun conjuncting with Chiron and then moving into Taurus. So we're thinking about being in that process of being in this hot, fast cycle, and then the sun starting to slow down and move into Taurus. So that's kind of the first little piece. So what we're really talking about here is looking at what types of Aries qualities might show up in your ninth house that kind of show the darker side of Aries. The problematic side of Aries definitely has to do with violence, with blame, with a very aggressive mindset in the ninth house of being combative, of the world is our enemy. This kind of, I can't help but think of the kind of isolationist policies that are trying to be put into play right now in the US. This idea that we're just one country. It's like, actually, we're on a world. We're on a round world where everything is interconnected. So I think that, the first part of this is analyzing the kind of, yeah, that darker side of Aries, like that need to, well, though it's those people's fault because they're doing this and
Intolerance.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I think that that's the first piece. Now, for you personally, something that can be helpful is to kind of zoom in on, what pisses me off? What makes me angry? What am I angry about in the world? And looking at that and then understanding, like going deeper during this conjunction, going deeper, what's beneath that? What am I so afraid of? What is the sort of source of this anger? Am I afraid of being annihilated? What is it? And I'm not saying it's invalid. I'm just saying get into it and get into an understanding what the fear is, because unconscious Aries is driven by fear. And as Laurie said, as you said earlier, that idea of like you pick up a gun when you're afraid, not because you feel fearless, right? Which I think is a great thing to think about. So that's kind of what we're getting at. We're looking at what is our individual part to play. And with Leo rising and Aries in your ninth house, the individual part to play is really looking at your critical thinking skills, looking at your life philosophy, your worldview. Do you travel? Are you someone who's traveled to lots of places and you have this broader worldview? Are you someone who is pursuing some kind of studies right now? That could be something that would be going on. But those are kind of the questions you want to get at. Is like, what's your part to play where you can transmute this hot energy and make it into this incredible, powerful force where you might actually just be a thought leader, where you've got this broad-minded worldview and you can see how interconnected we are. And that's what we should be thinking about, not this petty infighting that our world kind of is right now.
Mm.
So yeah, it's kind of a lot, but I'm gonna digress there, pass off to Laurie. Let's see what you have to add to this scene.
I'm not sure that I have a whole lot to add. I'm just thinking though about how that fiery energy in the ninth house, thinking about how that might show up for somebody. And in today's world, that could show up in so many different ways. If you are being impacted in some ways by the administration, the culture, the world that's going on right now, if you're an educator or, thinking about that ninth house as are all the kind of experiences that build our worldview. That
Mm,
includes education and travel and politics and religion, all of those big ideas. Yes, our philosophies of life, but all of those kind of things. So, yeah, where is the fear? I mean, it could be for many people, it could be really practical fear of losing their job if they're an educator or working in the government, those kind of things. There could be really big fears in there that are, ramping up a lot of anger.
mm,
And where are they going to take that anger out in that bigger world view?
mm.
Um, so what has to be considered here is, yeah, to go in there and look at it, find where fear is creating frustration. It doesn't start out as violence. It starts out as a little niggle of frustration.
Mm.
And, looking at where is that frustration around culture or worldview, and how can I just settle that and bring in the positive side of Aries, bring in the courage that it takes to not pick up the gun,
Mm.
the courage it takes to simply be decisive, to be determined to keep pushing forward, regardless of the fear. And that's what you want to develop so that you can help all of us settle into less aggravation and violence.
Yeah, this one's fascinating to me because it's
Yes.
the ninth house is your philosophy, and maybe with Chiron here too, it's like really broadening out that perspective. So you're not just, in 2026 in the Western culture, but thinking about all of the cultures that have existed on this earth. And part of the and expanding that out. And there's a spiritual wisdom to the ninth house too, like kind of bringing in, recognizing, indigenous wisdom, recognizing wisdom from that we didn't just start and then we're in this linear pattern and we've arrived in Western society. Like there's so many more branches to the tree than that. And there have been other times when we have, humans have lived in more balance with nature and more balance in, the spiritual part of nature. So it really is this opportunity to broaden out beyond what was conceived before. I think that that's the time we're in, with Saturn and Neptune and Aries as well, right? It brings in this bigger story. So I think, and the ninth house is just full of all of that. I mean, it's almost like how do you transmute the tribal aspect of religion and turn it into enlightened spirituality, making that leap from me and mine and pushing back on you and sort of going, wait, no, it's bigger and broader than this, and actually the oneness is all of it together.
Mm.
So I
Interesting.
don't know, this one's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really very interesting. So, if you've got Leo rising, you got your work cut out for you.
Yeah.
As we all do, I think.
So okay, let's move on to the
Okay. So, for those of you with Virgo rising, oh, you want everything to be just tidy and put together all the time. Virgo rising. Okay, so first of all, if you're listening to this, if you didn't listen to the very first part where Jennie and I just talked about Chiron and Aries, go back and listen to that. You'll get a lot more information that will help this settle. But what we're looking at the month of April, which what we are focusing in on is the very middle of the month. Because what happens is the month begins, it builds up to this particular point, and then it falls back into the rest of the month. But this middle point, which begins on the 16th, I believe, it's on the 16th that Chiron conjuncts the sun. The very next day, we have the new moon in Aries, and 2 days after that, the sun goes ahead and moves into Taurus. So this point right in the middle is so potent and so significant to think of the new moon. We're at the very darkest point of the moon when Chiron joins the sun. So first of all, let's think a little bit about where this is happening. Or do we want to think about Chiron first? Um, let's talk about the eighth house and having Aries in that eighth house. The eighth house it's one of the deepest houses. It's very much about the depths of intensity that we need to understand how to work with in order to be in relationships with each other. You know, that the eighth house is about how we navigate other people's baggage, how we figure out how to set boundaries, how we figure out how to share resources. It's a pretty heavy house. Having Aries there suggests that even though you're all tight and buttoned up and you can make things look good on the surface with that Virgo rising, that when it comes to sharing resources and navigating other people's stuff, we might tend to get a little selfish. It's one of the more difficult sides of Aries is selfishness, which we actually haven't thought about before, but since I'm looking at my own here, I recognize that that so Aries is very hot-headed and it's very self-focused. And what we are looking at with Chiron here, Chiron being a place of great wounding, and this is a transiting thing. So this is showing us a wound that we are all working on at the same time. Chiron in Aries tells us that right now we all need to be looking at where we're selfish, where we have fear that can turn into violence or anger. We want to look at the more negative side of Aries and realize that that's a cultural issue that we all individually are working on. And where it's happening in our individual charts is where we go to find it. Okay, so for those with Virgo rising, we go into those difficult places of navigating other people's baggage. And we think about how we get fearful, how we can get fearful when we approach difficult places with other people. And our fear can turn into selfishness, aggravation, all the way into violence, right?
Mhm.
So what what we're doing here is a process of transmuting that sense of entitlement and anger into the ability to find the courage to not pick up the violence, to not go into that selfishness, but to simply stand in determination, self-respect, and courage.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
piece of work.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking as you're talking to how much, just thinking about personal relationships, those one-on-one relationships, that's the seventh house. And then the eighth house is where you start bumping into all each other's baggage and you start trying to figure that out. And so, yeah, but it's interesting because I think Pisces is this, soft, perhaps susceptible sign, is going to be able to be more water. It's water. So it's watery and kind of more in that forgiving space. And then but wait a minute, bam! Then you hit Aries when it goes too far, and it's like, nope, And so there's a dance here that I think Aries speaks about, which is that whole balance of like autonomy and cooperation relationship, and with Aries in the eighth house is going to be a certain point. Like if you feel threatened, like that your autonomy is going to be taken away, or that you're going to be subsumed by the other person or the relationship somehow, that I think that that's where this is going to kind of show up and be like, wait a minute, wait. And so I think it's kind of working with that. And I mean, ultimately,
Mm.
the eighth house, in working with its polarity in the second house, we're talking about issues of worth. And so there is a sense that there might be, ultimately a struggle with, of feeling enough worth in a relationship that it might bring up
Hmm.
feelings of self-worth because you're over in that relationship house. Alternately, it might show you where your partners have struggles with their self-worth. So there's something in all of that. And part of the transmutation here is, recognizing those struggles. Is that what's at the core of the fear? Is there fear of being consumed in the relationship? Is there fear of, some kind of worth issue popping up here? Is that what's going on?
Interesting.
And that it's, really kind of turning the narrative around and saying, well, this is what I do want in relationship. And I do have these fears, and here's what I would like to do. And so finding ways
Yeah.
to manage that hot energy in
The
those
courage of being vulnerable. I,
yes,
I mean, that's
exactly.
really what this is. It's
Exactly.
the courage of being vulnerable in the face of other people's baggage.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's
Ah,
unsettling because you don't know what other people's bag when it's going to pop up. You can't control
right,
other people. You
right,
can't control their baggage.
right.
So it's a
Yeah,
naturally vulnerable place.
yes.
And sometimes, yeah, it's okay for Aries to say no here. And that's going to be part of the teaching as well when you take it into this Chiron space of what you've learned can inform other people about how to manage these struggles in relationships and really being, I don't know, maybe like an astrologer who help people with their relationships or, that
Something.
kind of thing could be something really helpful here.
Huh. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah. Uh,
Okay. I think we're done with that one.
yeah, I think so. So, all right, well, let's scoot along here to okay, so let's talk about Libra rising here. So we're talking about the Sun Chiron conjunction that happens on April 16th. It happens on the darkest day of the moon cycle, right before the new moon. And we're really just talking about what this implies. And the thing to think about too is that we're catching this at the end of Aries. The sun is almost out of Aries. It hooks up with Chiron at 26 degrees. And then just a couple days later, does its new moon, shines a light on the moon. and then it goes into Taurus. So we're really kind of at the end of Aries season here, and we're also uh, kind of bringing a 7 year process to close where Chiron has been in Aries since 2018. So there's a lot going on here. But just put all those things in your mind and then let's kind of get into it. So what we're really talking about is how Chiron and Aries kind of brings up the more problematic side of Aries, the side that is hot and angry and violent and destructive. I mean, that's kind of Aries at its worst, is this just flattening, just like, really wanting to destroy what is in one's way, basically. And when it's that out of balance, it also brings into play, selfishness, and just a lot of things that we know about our culture that is out of balance right now. There's a lot that we can kind of align with the darker side of Aries. So having Chiron in Aries is about how do we transmute that energy? How do we transmute that fiery, active energy? And each of us has a part to play. And so for Libra rising charts, the part to play very much comes out in our one-on-one relationships. So the what we're thinking about here is having to kind of confront what are we afraid of? Because whenever we feel, aggressive or having conflict, it's usually masking fear. I mean, almost always masking some fear. So the question to ask ourselves at this time, this April 16th time, is to really get at what is it that we are afraid of deep down? Like, what is it that we would love to hide? What is it that our bluster hides, and really kind of looking at that and then changing it, really working on transmuting it. So that might look like, how can you be more of a leader in your partnerships? How can you be more I really love the clarity of Aries, like just be very clear and here's, where I end and you begin. And I really want to, have some clarity around that. So I think that's what we're looking at. And Chiron brings in these more spiritual aspects of having to look at that and really just saying, what is our part to play in healing this energy in our culture and using it in a more positive way and recognizing that we're part of something much larger than just our individual lives or even our countries, but a whole planet, So
Mhm.
there's a lot being folded into this at this time. Yeah. What would you like to add?
Well, it's just interesting. We're thinking about the whole month of April, and this is kind of the midpoint, and it sort of, I feel like it kind of spreads out over the whole month.
Hmm.
And for people with Libra rising, yeah, this whole period of time is very much focused on relationship.
Mm.
And it's an interesting combination to me, thinking about somebody with Libra rising and Aries in their seventh house. That polarity is always an interesting one because people with Libra rising tend to want to please others. And then when it comes to their individual closest relationships, there's a way in which they want their partner to embody this energy of determination and protection, all those more positive sides of Aries. But it's in relationship that they have to confront their own fear, like
Yeah.
you said. It is in one-on-one partnership type relationships that someone with Libra rising has to look at where they have fear and where that fear can sometimes turn overly aggressive. So I don't think I'm saying anything different than you did. But just to think about what you're doing here, get it, pay attention. Where are you frustrated with your intimate partner or your business partner or some other your clients? If you happen to be in a practice where you see clients, that can also be a seventh house thing. So, where is there frustration and you just want to throw up your hands and say, the hell with you, move out? Where are you having that in either a major way or a minor way? Look for it because that is the energy that Chiron is kind of showing us that we all need to be working on transmuting that energy into a more simple courage and determination and the ability to stand up for ourselves without having to get scared and pull out a gun, just to be able to stand up for ourselves in a practical manner of this is what I need, period. End of conversation. You know, it sort of like makes me think of that whole thing of, no can have a period after it.
Yeah.
It can be a
No.
sentence like, no.
Yes.
I mean, that's kind of an Aries thing, isn't it? It's like,
Mhm.
yes, period, or no, period. There's not a
Yeah.
whole lot of complexity in Aries. It's just action. And
Yeah.
if there's fear under that action, it's going to turn into all the ugly sides of Aries. If there's simply determination and courage holding that space, you've got a much more workable solution. And if we could all work on transmuting Aries, there wouldn't be wars going on.
Yeah, I mean, I dare say it's like we are kind of reaching into what are the darker faces here. And I also can't help it, just what's coming to me here is you also might be in a situation where you're dealing with aggression from a partner,
That's
right?
true. That's
You
true.
know, so part of the so and that would all be part of the transmutation, is where are you also potentially receiving, especially as a Libra rising person, you're receiving something that is unacceptable, an abuse of power, so on and so forth. That's also going to possibly be in here. And because we're talking about Chiron, we're taking this out into the broader context, so your struggles, your trials and tribulations are also things that can help other people in their relationships. And you can think about being in partnership, not just with humans,
Hmm.
but with the entire, kind of world of living things. It's not just, you can take that into a more spiritual and broader minded perspective. It doesn't just have to stay in this very human focused place because, thinking about like, how are you, being, how are you treating animals? How are you, um, like speaking out in defense of them,
Yeah.
and not just animals, but everything, just the living kind of ecosystem that we're living in. So I just want to plant that seed. Like we really stay kind of focused in these human areas, but part of Chiron is about getting in touch with that more instinctual animal side of
Mhm.
ourselves. And part of that means then going out and meeting it and kind of getting in touch with that kind of wilderness.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah. So take your partner, go out, get a few horses, and go for a trail ride.
yeah, go camping.
Go camping
All
and horseback
right.
riding. Okay,
I know.
onward.
Scorpio rising.
Okay, so for those of you with Scorpio rising, first I'm going to just say it again. Go back and listen to the first part of this video because there's a lot that will help you understand what we're talking about. Now, we are talking about the month of April, but we're zeroing in on a very specific part of the month that the whole month leads up to, and then afterwards we assimilate it. So we're talking about this period of time on April 16th, I believe, when the sun conjuncts Chiron. Following that, the very next day, we have the new moon, and 2 days later, the sun moves into Taurus. So this is a little period of time, and we're thinking about Chiron. Chiron has been moving through Aries since 2018. It really represents a cultural wound that we all have our own part in working with. The wound of Chiron, there's a whole mythology about it. Yeah, listen to the first part of the video. We're talking about a cultural wound that is attached to the more negative side of Aries. Since 2018, we've been really embroiled in this, um, really needing to look at this. And right now, we have to be working with it. So the negative side of Aries is fear that turns into aggression, violence, anger, all of those things. Aries, all signs have a positive and a more difficult side to them. We wouldn't want to be without Aries because Aries is what gives us the energy to take action. And for folks with Scorpio rising, the ability to take action is something that you are really able to tap into just in the area of day-to-day routines, how you take care of your health, how you take care of your pets, how whatever, the day-to-day routines that make up your lifestyle. You've got a lot of energy in that area. You want to look at that and how do you look at look for where you may get into patterns of frustration and aggravation with yourself or with other people around how you do that, how you take care of your day to day.
Mm,
Where does anger and aggravation and frustration come in there? And how can you work with that? How can you work to transmute that anger into a more simple conversation of getting the work done?
mm,
And I like how you talked earlier, Jenny, about Chiron is always looking for solutions. Chiron is the wound,
mm,
and the wound is always looking for solutions, right? So in the sixth house, there's really an idea I have here of all the different ways that someone could be exploring how to take care of their health in better ways.
mhm,
But whatever you find in there that can help you transmute your own day-to-day frustrations into just determination to do what needs to be done, all the ways that you work with that can really be turned around into ways that you can help other people manage their own frustrations.
mhm. Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, it's interesting because what's really coming up for me is we're talking a lot about, the fear that's really the thing that's underneath violence, that's underneath anger is fear. And I think, with this one, it's interesting because I think there can be a fear because the sixth house can be associated with health.
Yeah.
I think there's also this place where if you aren't able to express Aries energy, it turns inwards. Basically, it
Mm.
turns into disease. And so in the sixth house, I'm thinking a lot about inflammation. That there's this
Mm,
potential for a
yeah.
lot of heat to build in the body in the sixth house. And that part of your transmutation of this is to learn how to release heat on different levels. And so the most obvious level is exercise. You're going out and you sweat and you go out for a run or a bike ride. But there's other levels. There's also levels of making sure you're incorporating kind of like hot tubs or saunas or things like that. There's that kind of level. But there's also the level of needing to turn, getting clear about that for yourself. Like, where are you? I think there's a danger here of internalizing and leading to poor health, is what I'm getting at.
Mm,
And so the idea is how do you kind of turn that and transmute that and channel that into positive daily routines.
mm,
These are daily practices. I
mm,
also it's popping up for me as things like getting support with like acupuncture, Reiki, energy medicine that can
mm,
help pull the heat out of your body.
mm,
Because I think that that's part of it, and there could be physical manifestation as well as the sort of mental aggravations and angers and things like that.
mm.
So that's what's popping up for
Interesting.
me, and just that understanding that Chiron's the healer. So Chiron is like looking at all these different modalities. So introducing different modalities into your daily routines may be the way through where you are then starting to teach other people or treat other people or that sort of thing,
Mm,
depending where your own Chiron is. But that's what's popping up for me with this.
interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. And what is it you're saying? Go out and ride a horse?
Go out and ride a horse. Yeah, in that sixth house, definitely. Go out and
But
ride a
yeah, the sixth
horse.
house of the animals though too. I can't. That's a different
Yeah,
episode.
yeah.
But
I love thinking about horseback riding with this. I,
yeah,
I don't think I'll
yes,
do it myself, but
The daily connection with animals could be a thing with the whole Chiron piece here. So
Absolutely.
think about that.
Yep.
All right, ready?
Yes.
Sagittarius rising. Okay, so for those of you with Sagittarius rising, we've just been really kind of rattling on here about the Sun Chiron conjunction that happens at 26 Aries on April 16th, right before the new moon. So it's happening sort of undercover of the dark moon here. And our whole conversation has revolved around the idea that Chiron, which has been in Aries since 2018, is really showing us the darker side of Aries. It's showing us the what I'm thinking of as the problematic side, which is the side which is destructive, which is so angry it obliterates things in front of it. Which is, the whole we were talking about gun violence and like the, sort of knee-jerk gun violence reaction. It seems to be totally prevalent in America, much more than any other country. So those are the types of topics we're talking about when we're thinking about dark Aries, and then we're getting into, well, it's all of our jobs to transmute this energy, to take this hot, angry energy and turn it into the brilliant force it's supposed to be, to the leader, the thing that can really lead the way and kind of lead us out of some of the darkness that we're in. So, and that is so true for Sagittarius rising, because for Sagittarius rising people, Aries lives in that fifth house, and the fifth house is the place where we give love. I
Mm.
mean, you can break that out into all different categories, but at its core, the fifth house is that just unbridled giving of love. And with Aries here, it's forceful. There is a lot of potency here. And then you can kind of take it into these other topics like how you express yourself, your self expression. So, creative arts. The idea that ultimately, your children are a form of self expression. They're who you give birth to. So, these are some of the topics that the fifth house brings in. And as a Sagittarius rising person, your kind of job to transmute the wounded Aries is exactly this: is taking that, looking at all the fears or the frustrations, and turning that into this, fierce love. I mean, that's kind of in a nutshell
Mm.
what I'm thinking about.
Mm.
And you have to really kind of get into what we've been talking about, Laurie and I, is what is beneath the anger, and it's fear. And so you really want to kind of dial into what sorts of fears might you see in the fifth house. What are the kinds of things?
Mm.
um so that's what you're really examining and looking at. What are the fears that might drive your creative process?
Mm.
So I don't know, what kinds of things do you think of, Lori, or what's your commentary on this one?
Well, it is interesting to think about Aries in the fifth house, just in terms of the amount of passion that a
Yeah.
person puts out into the world with Aries there. There's just this level of passion. And the fifth house, back in the day, everyone just talked about the fifth house as children, love affairs, creativity, and fun. So, the fifth house is love affairs. It's not your partners. It's falling in love. It's that initial, and with Aries there, which is the spark of energy, that kind of energy of loving can just show up so quickly. And
Mhm.
it can also, if there's fear around abandonment or I'm not good enough, kind of things that could come up around your creativity, that it could easily turn into a lot of frustration. Frustration, if you just think about those particular things, frustration with children, frustration with, I don't know, your dating apps, frustration with your creative projects that might start so easily, but then falter. So, looking into all of those ways that you give of yourself and finding that the places that you might hold fear. How would you hold fear that you're not going to be allowed to love the way you want to love,
Mhm.
or that you're going to be abandoned for that, or yeah. So finding that and healing that for yourself, transmuting anger and aggression into just a simple stance of courage, determination. Here I'm at. I don't have to pick up the gun. I can just stand with my own courage.
Yeah.
Um, hmm.
Yeah.
For some reason, it just popped into my head, and it probably should have popped into my head earlier, but just, you know, practicing that shift, practicing practicing standing in the face of fear
Mm,
without reaching for something that's gonna
mm,
push back.
mm,
For some reason, it made me think of this whole idea of practicing death because as humans, that's probably our biggest fear.
mm.
So standing in the face of it naked without an implement, just courage. I
Yeah.
don't know. My brain's gone off on a
Well,
tangent. And I think it's because with mine it falls in the eighth house. So that's my tangent.
well, I do think it's interesting though, like what we're trying to get at in this video too is like what kinds of fears, I kind of posed this question before, might pop up here. And one of them is the fear of not being able to express yourself the way you want. And you said it, the way you're not being able to love who you want to love. And, and these are legitimate fears. The question here is how do you face that fear and then figure out how you want to be fearless and stand up for that or protect it or be motivated by that in a conscious way rather than an unconscious way. And so I think there's something here about that, about just wanting to be allowed to express yourself how you want. I think that that's really important. And another and kind of sort of related to this, but another topic I think that could come up here in the fifth house is the idea of competition. Because the fifth house is part of your creative expression. So this is going to be sports are going to live here.
And you
You
want to be
know,
number one because it's Aries.
yes. And we live in this incredibly competitive culture. And
Mm,
so there's a way in which competition can be positive in the sense it drives you to be your best self, but it also can be dark if you start thinking about annihilating your competition. So I think there's something about what's your relationship to competition, as well as this idea of what's your relationship to like, hey, I'm afraid I won't be able to express myself how I want. There's a connection there.
yeah.
But really, we're trying to undo that, where not that all competition is bad, but the way that we're using it can be really destructive.
Right.
And there should be competition plus cooperation, and that those two together really make the concept of collaboration. But there's something in all of that, how you want to express yourself and being fierce and standing up for that is where we're going with Chiron there. So.
Loving fiercely and courageously, giving of yourself fearlessly and courageously. Yeah.
Yeah. And leading the way for the collective. That's the whole Chiron piece, right? The
Yeah.
carrying of that forward so
Yeah.
that other people can learn. So, all right.
All right. Let's go on.
Capricorn rising.
All right. So, for those of you with Capricorn rising, we are talking about the month of April, but we're zeroing in on one particular part of the month. On April 16th, the sun conjuncts Chiron. The very next day, we have the new moon. 2 days later, the sun moves into Taurus. So, this period that we're zeroing in on is in the darkest part of the moon when the sun conjuncts Chiron there. Um, Listen to the first part of the video because that will give you a lot of information that will keep this all in context. Um, what we are really thinking about here is how Chiron, which is not a planet, it's an asteroid, it's called the Wounded Healer. It is really showing us a cultural wound that we all have the opportunity right now to be working on. We Chiron suggests that there's never really a full healing, but working on it supports the whole, supports all of us. So we each have to look in our own chart, where is this happening? Where is there a Aries wound that needs to be transmuted? So, first of all, for you with Capricorn rising, where this is happening is at the very bottom of the chart. It's in the area that speaks to home, family, ancestry, the root core of your life. It could be the real estate your house sits on. There's some very deep area here. That's the area. Now, you have Aries there. So this suggests that in this area of your life, you have a lot of energy to start things, to get things going. Um, yeah, a lot of Aries energy. So there's two sides of each sign's energies. There's the more positive and the darker side. Because we're looking at Chiron, we're looking at a wound, we're looking at the dark side of Aries. And we want to find where that lives in ourselves because it's in all of us. Otherwise, it wouldn't be showing up in the world, right? So, in this area of your home and family, you want to be looking for the dark side of Aries. Where do you get frustrated? Maybe fairly minor. Depends on the work you've done in your life. It depends on your own personal chart. But this area, the home and family, is where Aries lives. So you've got startup energy, fiery energy, energy that's ruled by Mars. You can find where you get frustrated with your house, your home, the land it sits on, your parents, your family. Look for the darker recesses in that area and work on them, work with them. This area, which, where Aries is, frustration can be the start of it, but it can go all the way into crazy violence and wars. Um, yeah. So you're working to find where there's a problem in there for yourself and then working to transmute it into the positive side of Aries, which is determination, courage, kind of just leadership qualities, the ability to stand in the face of whatever difficulty there is and stand in it with courage. This is a really significant period. This is the last time. Chiron's been in Aries since 2018. This is the last time that the sun is going to conjunct it while it's in Aries. So this is really kind of a last opportunity for us to really do some serious work culturally on Aries problems, which we currently obviously have a lot of.
This one is particularly interesting to me, just with the Capricorn rising and the Aries down in the fourth house, because it really implies, the fourth house is to do with your lineage as well. It's the um, lowest part of the chart, like or maybe the most inward part, but it's the place where, you kind of get handed off the lineage. And so we all are in this lineage where this Aries violent way culture, we've been in it for at the very least the last couple thousand years, and probably you can take it back to several thousand years. I mean, you can really take this back. And so I think that gives you this question of Chiron kind of introduces this more cultural and kind of broad overview part to it. So it's questioning, what's my lineage?
Mm.
Where did I
Oh,
get
yeah.
instructed in the ways of violence, or how you handle your problems, or how you blame other people when you're mad, or what's that lineage? I'm not saying that you are like that
Right.
necessarily. I mean, that's not, it's more like, what's the lineage? What have you been handed? And even if you might feel like, well, I'm not quite like the way my ancestors were, there is this sense of like, but this is the inheritance. So we've all inherited this. We're all working this Chiron wound and in Aries in different ways. And those of you with Capricorn rising, you're really working with the root. What's the root call, the root information, or the root
Mm,
lineage that's being handed to you. And so with Chiron in this conjunction right now, you really have an opportunity to really transmute that, into what you're saying, Laurie, the willingness to, well, really it's the willingness to confront the past, like
mm,
it's the willingness to say, wow, these terrible things have been done and are being done. And now what do I do about it? How do I work with this? How do I stare that in the face and find the fearlessness to call it out and say, no, well, I don't want to do that anymore,
mm,
and this is my part of it. So it really, it is calling a deep courage, especially for
mm,
everybody. But for this one, it's like coming in at the core, it's coming
mm.
in, bubbling up from the underground. You can't get away from it because it's from your family, it's from your lineage, it's from your heritage. So there's something about just really handling that, and then like you said, just transmuting it into this courage, into this new way of doing this, a pioneering way of handling energy, and using it in a different way. So
Yeah, fearlessness, just
mhm.
holding steady in a state of fearlessness.
Yeah, and part exactly, and then
Like
just
that's easy, right?
yeah, I know it's so difficult. But yeah, and just bearing in mind this affects everything, the whole field of consciousness, the planet. It's not just our individual personal area, human lives. It really goes broader with Chiron here because Chiron's bridging that, bridging those pieces. So
Right.
anyway, I think I've rattled on enough about that. Are you ready to move on?
Absolutely.
Moving on to Aquarius rising. All right, so those of you with Aquarius rising, we are looking at the Sun Chiron conjunction in Aries, which is happening for you in your third house. This is happening at 26 degrees of Aries. It's happening on April 16th. It's the very last day of the moon cycle, so it's right before a new moon. So it's really kind of imbues us with this like need to work on this process of what is the Aries energy in our chart? How do we need to work with it? Because Chiron's been there since 2018, we're looking at a longer process, and we're definitely looking at the cultural misuse of fierce Aries energy, which is everywhere we look. I mean, everywhere we look, there's violence, there's fear, there's people running to the gun shop. I mean, at least in America, there's really a ton of it going on, and not that there isn't anything to be afraid of, but the question being asked here is really to dig into what subconscious fears or unconscious fears are we being driven by that's making us behave in these selfish ways that aren't really serving even yourself, but certainly not serving the collective. And as an Aquarius rising person, you're concerned about serving the collective. Like you want to do some good things for the collective, you want to innovate and invent things for the collective. I mean, that's sort of what your Aquarius rising suggests. So each of us have been kind of handed this need to deal with this cultural wound of the misuse of hot energy. And so the part to play of an Aquarius rising person has to do with how you use your voice.
Mm,
The way you're going to transmute this energy and turn it into something that is a leadership force is by really getting clear about really every time you open your mouth, every time you want to communicate something, just having some understanding of your motivation. And so
mm,
this April 16th time is an opportunity to get clear about what's driving your desire to speak, and get clear about the fear parts, and also the other parts that, maybe if you find yourself reaching towards that anger and wanting to shout at
mm.
somebody, which I can certainly relate to, and I listen to politics, but just kind of getting into the deeper layer of that. What's happening? What's the sense of inadequacy, or the feeling like you have to confront this all by yourself, or what is the thing underneath there that's really driving the more negative face of Aries, and how can you change it to be a voice for good, essentially. So yeah.
I really like that just thinking about the work that you need to do as an Aquarius rising is to get that edge out of your voice so that you can
Mhm.
be a voice for good. You know,
Mhm.
and also thinking about that third house as the immediate environment of your neighborhood. There, you've got a lot with Aries in that third house, you've got a lot of energy to be a leader in your immediate neighborhood or to, start things that are important to get started there. You've got the voice, you can just kind of put yourself into that area. This can also be related to your siblings. There's often a sibling component when it comes to the third house. So you want to really be thinking about what your fears are around speaking up in your immediate environment or with your siblings. Where is it that you may be, you may have fear around speaking in the clearest voice you have? And yet, if you try to stop that, you're going to be dealing with a lot of frustration.
Hmm.
And frustration ultimately plants the seeds for anger and all the rest of the negative Aries points. So, yes, there is a way of what your job really is at this point in time is to find and develop the fearlessness and the courage to be able to speak up and just hold steady. You don't need a gun. You don't need to be ready to punch someone in the face. You just need to hold steady and be clear.
Yep. And I think one other thing I want to add to this, thinking about Chiron, part of the job is bridging the gap. And with an Aquarius rising chart, the bridging the gap is going to be you may need to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. And whether that's a repressed group of people or animals or other entities, ecology itself, like conservation, all of those things are going to come into play here. It really kind of brings this bigger piece up, that no matter what you're doing, it's that possibility of speaking up for those who cannot speak. And especially with Aquarius rising, it's got that unusual understanding. There's a more innovative understanding that's happening.
And
So
it
it's easier to do that.
and it's speaking up to those that are close by. You know,
Yeah.
it's your environment. Look around your
Hmm.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
You don't need to be looking to the other side of the world. If you've got Aquarius rising right now, you need to be looking close to home.
Yeah.
Or your look at what's going on with your siblings, with your neighbors, with your neighborhood. Focus
Yeah.
on finding your voice to be a protector in that environment.
Yeah, and also you're just making me think, Laura, it's like your backyard, like
Yeah.
the bees and the butterflies,
Yeah.
because the bees show the state of the ecosystem.
And the
So there's
horse.
something about that. And you can make a big difference in your neighborhood, but just by having people, grow little patches for bees. I mean, I
Milkweed.
really want to expand this out to not just humans, it's
Yeah.
beyond
Milkweed.
chiropractic.
Milkweed is the thing for bees.
Yes.
Yes,
So I
absolutely.
love that. All right. Well, so we talked about the birds and the bees, and now we can move on to Pisces rising.
All right. So
Okay.
for those of you with Pisces rising, we are talking about the month of April, but we are zeroing in on one small part of it that just is the most significant thing we decided to talk about. So first of all, listen to the beginning part because it will give you a lot more context for this conversation. What we are looking at is the conjunction of the Sun to Chiron, which happens on the 16th of April, the day before the new moon, and 3 days before the Sun enters Taurus. So at this point, Chiron has been moving through Aries since 2018. Chiron is representing a cultural wound that we all need to be paying attention to. We really need to be paying attention to it at this time because this is the last time that the sun is shining its light on Chiron while it's in Aries. So, this is really showing us a piece that needs to be worked on. Chiron is called the wounded healer. It doesn't fully heal something, but it works on it to support the healing for all of us. Now, what's being healed? Well, the wound that we are talking about is the difficult side of Aries. Every sign has a positive manifestation and a more difficult, challenging one. Aries, when you think of Aries on a negative, from the negative perspective, you're thinking of anger, frustration, all the way up into issues of extreme violence and war. So clearly, there's a huge wound in this area that we are all quite aware of at the moment. There's more guns in this country than we can even comprehend.
Three times
So
as many people.
So this is an important thing for us to be thinking about is how we can work with this very difficult, challenging energy, how we can support the transmutation of that difficult side of it into the more positive side of it. So the more positive side of Aries is the fact that, man, Aries just has the energy of ignition, the energy to start things up, to get things rolling. It has, Aries really, I feel like one of the most important things to me about Aries is the development of courage.
Mm.
And in thinking about the development of courage with Aries, and on the flip side, thinking of all these negative things about Aries, it's pretty clear that fear is the factor that we really need to think about
Mhm.
because it is fear that creates all of the violence and anger.
Mhm.
So the courage of Aries is really the courage to find what that fear is and not pick up the gun. Find the activities that will drive you forward and hold that space of fearlessness without having to rely on something because you've got this kernel of fear eating you up. So that's kind of the process for you with this happening in the second house. The second house is about your values. It's about your money, your resources, and your personal values. People with Pisces rising, there's such a kind of mystical sense of self or a kind of a soft sense of self with Pisces rising. But when it comes to understanding your values, you got a lot of heat there. You understand what money means to you. You understand your personal values are really involved in the ability to take action. So, how are we going to work with that? What's the fear? Is the fear losing your resources, not knowing how to reach your own self-worth? What is the fear, and how can you, if you're feeling frustration, if you're scared of the whatever, I don't know, the stock market, whatever, if there's some fear that's around money or resources, how can you stand in that without going into the frustration?
Mm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what is the answer to that?
Mm. Right. Well, I mean, I was just going to comment too. It's just like, I mean, this one's interesting because Pisces is such a susceptible, vulnerable sign. And it's, really showing up with Pisces on your sleeve there is
Mhm.
not an easy placement. I think Pisces rising is like you are walking the path of developing compassion. And I think it'd be really easy to translate that Aries in the second house as a real struggle with insecurity, a real struggle with I'm not worth very much and I feel pretty insecure. And so I think when you put those two things together, the transmutational path is all about owning that vulnerability and using that vulnerability as your asset and sort of saying, yeah, you're right, I am susceptible, but by owning your own by owning your vulnerability, by reckoning with it, by working with it, you are making yourself where you can't be taken down by somebody else trying to have a dig at your vulnerability because you're already owning it. They
Mhm.
can't sneak up behind you and cut the rug out from under you because you're doing it. So I think there's a big lesson here in about standing in that vulnerable space and the courage it takes to do that, the courage it takes to believe in yourself, to hold that space is how the Aries shows up in the second house. And if that's not a lesson we all can't learn from, I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know what is. Like, just
Mhm.
really, we're redefining what it means to be a hero. And a hero is
Mhm.
not the angry guy with the gun.
Right.
The hero is the person who's vulnerable and stands up anyway, knowing that they may be a target, knowing
Right.
that they may be attacked,
Yeah.
knowing that they may be, taken down by those forces. But having that courage to say, no, I'm sorry, this is what's important. This is my principles, that second house.
Mhm.
Is so powerful, and it is what some of the people in power are afraid of
Mhm.
that kind of strength to stand on your own principles and your own morals like that. So
It's
it's potent.
fascinating.
Yeah. So yes. Well, anyway, do you have anything else about this one, or should we
I don't
stop?
think so. I think that's about it. I just, I find myself thinking about how important this is,
Hmm.
being the last Sun conjunct Chiron of the whole however many years it's been since 2018, and just seeing in the public view so clearly what fear turns into when it's not awakened to itself, when it's not working in the proper way, what it can turn into. And we don't have to look very far to see that right now.
Yeah, and it just goes to show you that there's a tremendous amount of fear, and
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
and ultimately, I think the
Yeah.
fear at the core level is the fear of the changing environment, the changing planet,
Yeah.
and all these things that go about it. But anyway, that's a whole nother video.
It
So I'm
is.
gonna close
It
close this
is.
one up and
That is a whole
thank,
nother video. Maybe we should make that one next.
oh, thank you, Lori, and thanks
Thank
everybody.
you, Jenny. It's been delightful to talk to you, and we will do it again.
Sounds good. Thank you.